The scent of a woodworking workshop is one of the most attractive smells to me, and this fragrance captures it perfectly. Hello, welcome back to Seldomly Often. I'm Daniel. Today we're talking fragrances, and this is a practical review of Durga Bowmakers. These reviews are for fragrances I have a lot of experience with, multiple wears in many situations, and I meant to give you a general idea of what it feels to wear the fragrance. As per usual, I do a lot of research before buying fragrances, but I don't really like to go into details about notes and accords, as I don't think that they help the end user. I'd rather talk about the wear experience as a whole. Today on this channel, we're going to be covering for the first time a fragrance from Durga, an American brand from New York City, specifically Brooklyn, founded by musician and lecturer David Seth. Durga is one of those brands that I would consider indie in most of their facets. They're very modern, very edgy, very trendy. Their style is really cool. I really like their website and I really suggest you go check it out. Very modern, very well done, enticing. Their fragrances are interesting, edgy, with fun names, typical of the indie brands. Bowmakers is a fragrance that is supposed to be replicating or recreating the idea and the smell of the violin makers of the 1800s in the Massachusetts area. This is a very photorealistic wood scent that almost transcends the concept of fragrance. This smells like it's not really something that is meant to be worn. It smells like a recreation of a smell. It's really interesting. I love wearing this. It's so evocative of a specific type of scenery. I'm not very familiar with violin making myself, but the woodworking vibe that this has is pretty much second to none. All of the components here, the actual woods, the materials that are used, are rendered in an incredibly vivid photorealistic way. It's a treat to the nose. It's really evocative. It's a beautiful wear experience. Durga is a brand that I've been always curious about. Their fragrances really intrigued me. Unfortunately, these are kind of hard to get by here where I live. They only officially ship to the US, Canada, and the UK. That means that these, I have to get them through importers, oftentimes paying heavy import taxes. At this moment, I have 4 Durga fragrances. I have Burning Barbershop, Bowmakers, Amberkizo, and Free Trapper. They're all very interesting and offer a very unique wear experience that is totally worth sampling. Bowmakers was the first fragrance that I got from the brand. On sites like Fragrantica and Parfumo, it seems to be one of the more popular ones, if not the most popular. Scent profile wise, it seemed really interesting. I am, after all, really into wood fragrances. Everything seems to fit the bill, so I went ahead and purchased it. Overall, it's a really great scent profile that I really enjoy wearing. I really have nothing bad to say except for one thing, but we're going to talk about the scent profile after we talk about the presentation. The presentation for Durga is really good in your typical indie perfume brand fashion. The bottles themselves look very unique. They feel bespoke, they feel custom. I really like the cylindrical aspect. This is a 50 ml bottle. The 100 ml bottle is basically a scaled up vertically version of this. The bottle feels very good in hand. It feels heavy. The glass is extremely transparent. I really like this metal plaque up top. It really makes it unique. The labeling is incredibly homemade. This one here specifically is a little bit crooked, so there's that charming aspect of it, if you want to call it that. The cap feels very unique because it's a metal cap, it's heavy, but it clicks into place in a very strange fashion. The atomizer is really interesting because it's a little tiny action that barely extends over the color of the fragrance. The action is not that great, I have to be sincere here. Let's give it a couple sprays. It doesn't spray that well. It kind of dribbles, it doesn't really leak, but overall it's a little bit weak. I'm not complaining too much because this is not one of those fragrances that I wear every day, but the atomizer could definitely benefit from a little bit more of a pressurized diffuse action. Yeah, the cap is incredibly satisfying to use. It holds the bottle up. It's very nice and firm. The boxes these come in are also super beautiful. They're these kind of a wooden cardboard box. I'm not really sure. They might actually be wooden. They feature a weird kind of drawer design. I think they're really cool. I think they're really interesting. And again, they fit the indie vibe. Overall presentation, I really can't complain. The atomizer could be a little bit better. The labeling could be a little bit more straight. But it's charming, it's indie, it's fun. It's okay. Onto the scent profile for the Durga's Bowmakers. This is where the magic happens. This is where this fragrance really shines on its own. This is where the fragrance comes out as really, really unique. So as I said, this is supposed to replicate the idea, the concept, the atmosphere, the image of the violin makers in the 1800s. This is supposed to be a photorealistic rendition of a violin maker's shop. And I have to say, this completely succeeds. It's a beautiful woody fragrance that is incredibly evocative. As you may know, I'm not really interested in notes for fragrances, but in here there's something that really struck a chord with me, and that was the varnish accord that's at the top. The varnish accord in here is incredibly detectable, incredibly present. It has this sort of a paint thinner type of vibe, this sort of a gasoline type of oiliness. It really is incredibly reminiscent of varnish or paint stripper or something like that. It has a chemical type of aspect that really pairs well with the woods that are in the mid and in the base. Speaking of the wood component, this is probably the best part of this fragrance. They're incredibly well done. You can really feel and you can really smell the fibers in the wood. You can smell all the sawdust that's on the floor. Everything about woodworking is replicated in here. It's a type of wood which is fresh, it's pungent, it's very resinous. This is the type of wood that when it gets cut, it leaves a sticky residue on the saw blade. It's a very beautiful, resinous, almost balsamic wood. This fragrance does not really transition much during the wear experience. It pretty much stays the same top to bottom, with the only detectable difference is that varnish accord, very, very present in the top notes in the opening, that slowly fades off in the dry down. And this fragrance basically dries down to pure woods. The overall tonal range for this fragrance, I would say it's mid-heavy. Yes, we have that varnish note at the top that sort of elevates the scent profile, but it's sort of short-lived. We're talking about 30 minutes, and then the scent profile basically sits in the mid. There are no real base notes. There's really nothing to give it density and rumble at the bottom. It's all very mid. This usually means that the scent has high versatility, that is very wearable in most seasons. But in this case, again, I have to really touch upon the fact that this doesn't really smell like something that you would want to wear on a daily basis. It's so photorealistic and almost transcends that concept of perfume that really makes this a challenging type of wear. As I mentioned before, I'm not super familiar with the process of making violins, so I tend to associate this fragrance to the scent of a freshly finished house interior, a house with wooden shiny lacquer floors, a house with old type of furniture that has been polished and is again shiny. Everything about this really screams wood, screams refinement. It's very, very beautiful. Living in the mountains of Switzerland, I do live in a wooden house, and this perfectly represents the smell of my house when I first moved in. It was all encompassing. It was so overwhelming, so beautiful. Now, unfortunately, my nose got used to the smell of the house, and I only really perceive it if I'm away for a certain period of time. And actually, this is a perfect segue onto the longevity and the detectability of this fragrance. I'm not even talking about projection per se. The longevity on this is pretty bad, and that's my gripe with this fragrance. The smell is so good, and I would like the scent to last a lot longer. Unfortunately, the real world longevity on my skin is about 4 to 5 hours, and only one of those hours is filled with projection and sillage. The other 4 hours is pretty much a skin scent type of wear. On one side, I am really upset about the poor longevity of this fragrance. On the other, I sort of understand why it has been designed like this, because again, it's not really something that you would want to wear every day, all day. It's not really meant for that. I feel that this is a little bit more of a sensorial scent type of experience. You spray this, you're transported to that place, then it wears off, and you're free to go about your day and wear something else or just do something else. If this would have been a super long lasting fragrance, the scent profile for this could have been perceived as a lot more fatiguing than it is. Yeah, I am a little bit longing for a bit more performance, but overall, I can't really complain just because the scent profile is so good. Topping off the practicalities, as you may suspect, this is not really a practical scent per se. It is versatile in terms of weight, in terms of wear experience, but it's such a specific type of smell that I doubt that this could be a signature scent for anyone. And it's really, really interesting and polarizing, so you might get a lot of questions of why you're smelling like wood. And just to be clear, the wood component here is very, very different from those mass appealing fragrances that feature wood in the notes. Stuff like Oud Wood, stuff like Oud by MFK, even fragrances that feature a lot more actual oud in there, pale in comparison to the wood rendition of this fragrance. This feels like you're in a woodworking workshop, actually. actually. So yeah, versatility and use cases are not that great, and although this leans casual and fun because it is an indie perfume, I feel like weird fragrances like this would probably fare better when worn in contrast with elegant clothing or with a specifically confident stride. Okay, this is the part of the video where I showcase a couple options to help ground the fragrance and to give some reference. I only chose 2 in this case because I was really struggling to get options out. I really didn't know what component of the fragrance to leverage because it doesn't have many facets, so I went with the simple woody description here. And the first fragrance that I want to talk about is actually Tom Ford Bois Marocain. This, I mentioned it in another video, is actually something that I use a lot to layer with Bowmakers to enhance the longevity and to enhance the woody aspect to it. I almost never layer fragrances as part of my idea and approach, but these two work so well together, they give basically the ultimate rendition of wood. On its own, Bois Marocain is actually quite similar to Bowmakers. To me, this is a more wearable version of Bowmakers. A lot more perfumey, a lot more approachable. Still very woody, it still very beautifully replicates the idea of smelling a tree and of smelling fresh wood, but it has a little bit more of a transition morphing aspect that dries down to a beautiful enveloping amber. This to me is one of the more underrated private blends by Tom Ford. It's actually quite long lasting, it's a beautiful wear, very easy to wear, very easy to like, but nonetheless, very photorealistic in its wood rendition. I really like this. The second option I want to showcase is a very different type of woody fragrance. This one here is Amouage Beach Hut Woman. The woody aspect in this is a lot more marine-y, has a lot more of a driftwood type of scent profile. This fragrance is actually quite airy. It's much more of a marine type scent rather than a wood-centric scent. It's a beautiful, if not the most beautiful rendition of the beach in winter. Some say that it smells kind of like Tom Ford's Oud Mineral. I don't really agree. This is much softer, it's much more elegant, it's much more three-dimensional. It's such an evocative type of scent. It's so light in the air. This, despite being in the women's line and despite being marketed to women, it's an absolutely unisex fragrance. Could be easily worn by a man or a woman or anything in between. It's a beautiful experience, very, very evocative, very calming and relaxing. This smells like salty wind in your face with a little bit of wood component in the backbone. The longevity of this is absolutely stellar, and I can't wait to wear a lot more of this in the upcoming warmer month. Okay, back to the Durga's Bowmakers with my final overview and recommendation. I have to say that I really like the scent profile for Bowmakers. I wish it would last a little bit longer. It's so photorealistic, it's so beautiful, it's so interesting and indie. I really enjoy wearing this every time, and it puts a smile to my face. As far as recommendations go, the whole house of Durga to me is absolutely worth smelling. You should definitely get a discovery set. A lot of their fragrances are beautiful, they're evocative, they're interesting and quirky. I really like their approach, and I have to admit that I really have a soft spot for this sort of manufacturing. Within the Durga line, Bowmakers to me is a standout, not because it's the best fragrance from the line, far from it in my opinion. It's because of the very distinct scent profile, the very direct imaging with a huge wow effect. If you're coming from designer perfumes, and even if you're coming from a little bit more of a mainstream type of niche perfumery background, smelling Bowmakers will be an absolute eye-opener, and I really recommend the experience to anyone. If you like this type of content, if you like my approach to video, feel free to subscribe. It always helps the channel and it's massively appreciated. If you want to interact with me, leave a comment, suggestion, opinion, or anything else down below. I always reply and I always keep the conversation open. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for your time. It's always massively appreciated. Many more videos to come as per usual. See you in the next time. Cheers.